because we are about to start our first panel discussion and of course also the Q&A. So once again, you can submit your questions. So our lovely moderator will be also taking questions from both the audience here and also through the online channels. So the topic that they're going to discuss about is human values within AI, ethics and regulations. So without further ado, I'm happy to give the floor again back to Dr. Paloma Gröt Tupei, and she's going to also introduce the other panelists on the stage here. So enjoy the discussion.
My side, those who have already saw me today, you're right. I was already having a very nice and interesting chat with Jan Tallinn before lunch, but actually now I have the challenge of guiding you after this just after lunch discussion. But I think with my panelists here, we will definitely not fall asleep. So, our topic, human values within AI, ethics and regulations. Actually, as we have already learned, AI is here first to stay, and it can do a lot of interesting and funny things. We use it for translations. We know that we have ChatGPT that will now write all our exams. We have OpenAI, which will create artwork. And then we have also had some problems with AI. And I think we have the third time that I will address the issue of the Dutch childcare benefit scandal we have experienced, linked to the use of, we would say, AI, machine learning solutions that were used to generate risk profiles. So we see, I will not here repeat myself telling the story again and again, but we know that the problem that this Dutch childcare benefit scandal caused, it had a great impact. It had a great impact on real people, real lives. It led to people committing suicide, to children being taken away from their families because many families were wrongly accused of having committed fraud and they had to pay back allowances. So therefore, we see, actually looking at the policy papers and globally and nationally, that AI is here to stay. We see it also at business level. Nothing is going to stop private entities to use these solutions, but the question arises, how can we mitigate the challenges that it poses to fundamental rights? And can we mitigate them by regulations? Is that possible or not? And actually, I'm very much looking forward to hear your thoughts on that. Now I come also to introduce you. So starting with here, Sarah Polak from the Czech Republic. She's an Oxford-educated archaeologist, actually, who has worked at international level in the tech sector her entire career, and she's focused on enhancing technological and AI literacy. Actually, you're leading a research group at the Czech Technical University in Prague, focusing on the study of principle of cloud civilizations. If I understand, and more broadly speaking, is you are studying the impact of technologies on the structure of human society. Then we have Elvira Kreke, correctly, from Latvia, a lawyer, specialized in business development, co-founder of Legal Hackers Riga chapter and Latvian ambassador to the European Legal Tech Association, and actually also a founder and CEO of Legally, a chatbot and online service provider in cybersecurity and data protection issues. Is that correct? Okay. Then Merili Kaupel from Estonia. She's a lawyer. Merili works actually at the Estonian Data Protection Inspectorate. So she knows best about data issues in real life and our biggest concerns here in Estonia, dealing with the question of data protection. And she is specialized in the fields of insurance and financial data protection, and also a member of the Financial Matters Expert Subgroup at the European Data Protection Board. And then we have Orsolia. Do you hear us, Orsolia?
Yes,
right? Yeah,
yes,
great.
thank you.
Hi, great to see you. Regrettably, yeah, we have strikes. I think yesterday we had strikes at Berlin airport. So Orsolia was not able to be with us here. But as she is a senior advocacy officer at Liberties, Berlin NGO focused on the protection of fundamental rights in Europe. So I'm very happy that at least online you can be with us and share your thoughts with us. You're working mostly on protecting fundamental rights in the digital age, and leading also advocacy projects in the last years on the COVID apps and privacy practices of online advertisement industry. I'm not misunderstood. So, and last but not least, we have our one main panelist here, for not to be accused that we're discriminating the other sex. So we have a representative here. Florian is actually from Germany, but holds a master's degrees in politics and security from the University College in London, and at some point fell in love with his Estonian wife and the e-government. So if I understand, sees to, that's good. So today he's a project manager at Proud Engineers here in Estonia, supporting governments on political and structural changes to build digital societies. So I'm really very happy that our panelists come from very different backgrounds. Therefore, I myself also plan to ask you similar questions just to see how we get together these different views from your different perspectives, also from your. So I hope everything works well with from the technical side. If there's anything, just let us know. We'll try to include you as good as possible. So also for you, if you want to comment on an answer that another panelist is giving, just feel free, raise your hand. And for all others of you, please use the works up, then here possibilities to ask questions. I see them here. So, but without much further ado, let's go to our topic and actually take a warm-up question, because we were talking and we're supposed to speak about human values within AI ethics and regulations. And we have actually at EU level, I will mostly focus here on EU level because we are in the EU, always feel free to use international examples also. But within the EU, we have actually the EU Charter on Fundamental Rights. We have EU regulations on non-discriminations. We have the European Convention on Fundamental Rights. And actually, as was said by Professor Neiman-Metcalf in the beginning, we should avoid overregulation. And she also posed the question if there cannot all be one IA Act. So is it that, do you think that we really need to regulate a fundamental rights protection with regard to AI, and maybe why, if we have already a lot of regulations on the protection of fundamental rights? Or is there something special now in this new case that requires different and additional regulation from those we already have. And so maybe I start with you, Sarah. Would you like to comment on this?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, cool.
Great.
Thank you. It's a huge honor to be here. It's my first time in Tallinn and in Estonia, so I'm very excited because for the first time, like in real life, I can see, we're hugely inspired in the Czech Republic by your digitalization and e-government efforts. So yes, I fell in love with it too. It's amazing. Because I'm an archaeologist and an evolutionary anthropologist, this kind of question, I always like to take a step back to make my education sound more relevant and talk about where the concept of human values and regulation even comes from, because it really terrifies me whenever any federation or any nation state says, we're doing objective good here. That's always extremely dystopian for me. And when you actually look at the origin of regulation, whether that's like the Code of Hammurabi in Mesopotamia, whether you look at the Magna Carta from 1215 or the Bill of Human Rights from the 17th century, it's always an attempt of a newly kind of arisen nation state or an empire to kind of codify what should be done in order to kind of keep society in some kind of check to make sure that it functions. And there is something that's emerging that's actually, I don't think necessarily related to AI, but more the phenomenon of blockchain, where we see kind of society splitting in two. You have the kind of nation states that we're used to, or like at least we're used to since the 17th century and the end of the 30 Years' War. But you also have this kind of like parallel cloud civilization where people are starting to have their own regulations, their own social structures that are not related to the geopolitical state, and but they perfectly kind of like represent or kind of fulfill the function that the standard society normally does. And whether that is decentralized autonomous organization, whether that's crypto, whether that is kind of decentralized judicial systems, we kind of see people taking refuge in the technological space. And we also see nation states extremely struggling with that. And they kind of usually react to that with a like 100-page PDF of how we should regulate the next kind of technological phenomenon to kind of stop this social stratification from happening. But I feel that we're actually increasingly going towards the situation where we're going to have this kind of decentralized cloud, almost like tribal system of societies, and then the kind of standard nation states that we're used to. And therefore, I think that it's much more down to the politicians to accept this duality and to kind of accept dialogue between those two spheres, rather than trying to kind of stop that progress from happening and from trying to basically stop people from living in a decentralized way, which I think is the kind of like next step of social evolution. And I don't really see regulation necessarily fitting into that, at least like in the case of like NIS2 or the AI regulation. It kind of is a very schizophrenic debate in that regard.
But the AI regulation is then, you would see it as a necessary thing?
On the nation state level, perhaps, but I don't think that, I think that people are going to find ways of going around that. And whether that is kind of retreating into, other countries. I have, for example, a lot of friends who have like 2, 3, 4 citizenships, like in Panama and in Estonia. You guys are great at this. Or people like simply just doing their activities elsewhere. I was, for example, in Ethiopia, we're discussing with Florian, and it's really interesting how, for example, the Dutch, the way that they do their the business there in regards to like flowers and tulips and roses and things like that, which the Dutch are very good at. But you can see that, for example, the companies are regulated hugely in like in the geopolitics of Europe. But then you go to Ethiopia and there's basically like no regulation to cover that there. And you've got European companies going there to basically run their business anyway. So people always find a way around. And I don't think that regulation, one-way regulation, is the way of going about kind of expanding that dialogue.
I think the EU maybe hopes also on that what's called Brussels effect, as we had with the GDPR, that then worldwide people still would take up this regulations just to be able later to do business also in the EU. So this is, let's see. Yeah. Florian, your thoughts maybe on that?
Maybe. It seems to me like the demand or the discussion about having a sort of unified AI Act stems from the discontent at the current output of AI. Well, you have to remember that AI is generative in nature. And so the fact that it currently gives, in our opinion, flawed output is a direct result of the lack of enforcement of previous legislation, anti-discrimination, anti-racism, and so on. It's because the previously existing laws have not been followed. Why they haven't been followed, that's a societal debate that we can all discuss later at the pub. But overall, I feel it sort of underlines that at least in my opinion, there is no necessity for a unified AI Act. It's about implementing and properly enforcing, if that is the desired goal, of previous legislation. Speaking about the field of AI in general, I'm sort of reminded, when you mentioned the Code of Hammurabi and so on. To me, that whole space feels a lot like the United States trying to manifest destiny. There is a frontier, and there is to this side of the frontier, there's a very clear, structured, codified society. And then there's people that we just throw manpower at lawless lands, evicting the locals and so on, and seeing what sticks over the next 20, 30, 40 years. And the question is, how much do we want to build legal frameworks during this, whether we like it or not, formative period of the internet and of society in general? I don't have an answer to that. I would love for Jan to be a part of this panel as well, also so that I'm not the only quota male representative here. But yeah, so it's an open-ended question, but sort of a priori establishing too strong legal frameworks can disincentivize all kinds of innovation. So it's a very difficult balance to strike.
Thank you very much. Elvira.
Okay, so my take on this, specifically on AI Act, I would say it's very 50-50, and there are a lot of ways to actually talk about it. And the first one, I think AI Act and discussions around AI Act and implementing it is important to stir the discussion around it, right? So to make companies who develop AI or implement AI or distribute AI technologies, so to make them think about these ethical aspects. But at the same time, as already has been commented, we cannot really how to say, basically the things will still happen. The companies still will still make these technologies. There will be still many applications how we will use AI, right? And we cannot really change that, and we cannot monitor that, and we cannot also force that. But at the same time, we need to kind of make this discussion into public. And one of the things that I have been blessed with is to also foresee how GDPR has been enforced, because I also deal with data protection. And one of the things that I'm concerned more about, and also it has been mentioned, is the enforceability and how we can actually make sure that when we develop this regulation, the companies do not just do it on paper, right? So how can they actually start to think it by design? So actually to make this technology ethical and to actually follow through so that it works in an ethical way, right? And not just to do it by paper, create these policies and just a checkbox. So like, I think that's the most discussion around it, because in general, I think, yes, it should be regulated, but to a certain extent. And another thing that I wanted to add is the overregulation part, which I'm also very concerned about, is since I'm representing the private sector, is SMEs. So we all know that, for example, GDPR put a really large financial burden on companies. And for large companies, of course, it's very easy. They have legal departments, so they can become compliant and they can go into it. But at the same time, when it comes to SMEs and new startups, which oftentimes are the ones who are driving innovation, right? And it's how it works in the startup world. You develop an AI technology, eventually a larger company acquires you and they innovate, right, together. It's what happens also with ChatGPT and Microsoft, for example. And for example, if these startups want to go into an AI field, they want to develop AI technology, they need to first adhere to GDPR because they will be dealing with data. They will, if they're in a financial sector, maybe they will be also a subject to AML. They will need to comply with that. And then also there will be an AI Act. So is it not too much of a burden, for example, for SMEs, and will it not hinder innovation? So that's one of the concerns that I want to also bring and discuss about.
Right, that's very interesting. Yeah, actually, the high-level expert group on AI just before the act was presented, they also voiced their concerns, and they said that there may be a lack of evidence still for really regulating it at a legal basis. On the other hand, yeah, question that must development come over everything. Yeah. What do you think, Merili, of this topic? How do you feel about the AI Act?
In regards to AI, we're quite far from overregulation. As an official of the GPA, what I can say is that we need something to regulate this topic. As was mentioned earlier, companies are going to be using AI regardless. So I think it's better to have some kind of form that you do. For example, we have quite a few people coming to us asking, can I use this recognition system or something kind of like infringing me using this AI system? So what we can do is answer them purely from this stated view from GDPR. You know, what's more likely than not is that we're going to put on that, well, there doesn't seem to be enough grounds for processing of
Oh, better. So what I was saying that what is more likely to happen than not is that we would tell these people or companies that there doesn't seem to be enough grounds for processing of legal of personal data. However, I think what these companies are asking for us is way broader of a question. Can we use such AI system? For example, questions about, is this a high-risk system? Is it maybe even malicious AI? These questions are completely left out of the picture right now. And we can't answer these questions from based on GDPR. GDPR is not meant to be answering those questions. But at the same time, it's not like these companies or people have some other authority to go to with these questions or some other regulations giving answer just to their questions. So I think we're already at a point where there is great interest in using AI systems, and we need to have some piece of legislation to kind of make sure that it's used in a sensible manner, at least.
Thank you very much. I hear Reid. I think that our audience online did in the beginning not hear what you said. And so I just maybe repeat briefly that you see the necessity for an AI Act, if I see it correctly.
Indeed, yes.
From your also practical work experience.
Yes.
Thank you. It's just, I think now it's everything fixed. People can hear. Well, Salia.
Thank you for having me here.
We don't hear you very well. Let's see.
And now?
Better, a bit nearer.
Okay. So I'm trying my best.
I hope.
Do you hear me now?
I can hear you. I don't know how it is with the people online. I hope so.
All right. So the first speaker went back to her education and said that as an archaeologist, she is very suspicious about regulations and suspicious about government stopping people from living in a decentralized way. And then we heard arguments about how regulation hinders innovation and how it can be expensive. Now, I think I'm the biggest fan of regulations, also by education. I came from an academic background before. In my previous professional life, I was an academic doing research and teaching political philosophy and ethics. And this background made me a big fan of the governments, in a way, also suspicious, but I certainly believe that regulations are good because they are actually helping to solve prisoners' dilemmas, also in this field. So if I have an AI company and I want to be ethical, but there is no regulation forcing this kind of being ethical on the market, I will have a market disadvantage. I will be basically driven out of the market. It will be costly for me to be good, to do what is good for the society. And therefore, I think when there is working regulation that is actually enforced, that is good for the society and good for those market agents who want to benefit our societies. That was it.
Thank you so much, Asalia. Yeah, it's just here. I see online. I read here that online it's also fine. People are able to follow and hear you. That's good. So we see already, I'm quite happy to see that here are so different views in our panel. That makes it more interesting. Actually, again, coming back to the Dutch childcare benefit case. That, I have thought about it, and what came to my mind is that sure, we had this risk profiles there, and the AI was used, machine learning was used, the algorithm was used to generate risk profiles, but those risk profiles did not take any decisions. This was actually not an AI taking a decision, but this was a proposal to civil servants, to the authorities, what they should do. But what we saw was that they just took it for granted, or and made the decision based on that without using maybe their own possibilities, minds, thinking something went wrong there. But this is a thing that has kept me thinking and thinking of how can we regulate this? Is it possible, or what to do with this danger that we actually will have AI and maybe it's really not deciding, but we see also how it has an impact on our decision making, and that actually decision making is been taken from us. And I don't know how you see it, thinking of regulations. You think you can regulate that, or how should we address that? How should we address that in society? That AI is maybe not even making decisions, but is proposing us things, to buy things, to have risks, and we just take them for granted. So based on that, I don't know, maybe we start with Arsalia, because you had to wait and we're the last there.
Yes. So yes, the AI is giving proposals, and usually people just accept these proposals. We are very lazy beings, and this is how it usually works. I think the way out is that people who are actually, especially public servants who are using these systems, need to be educated, maybe repeatedly, that these systems don't give them the truth as it is, but these systems are based on different kind of factors that they're using in figuring out what the right proposal should be. There should be explainability of this system, so that these public servants should understand how this system works, and the transparency. And from this, what I have, but this made me think about the AI Act, in which there is a fundamental problem. So in the AI Act, providers have to go through a conformity assessment, but then users, that is, for example, an authority, doesn't need to do anything about the AI systems they use. And as a civil society organization, we believe that this is very, very wrong. You cannot foresee all kinds of uses of any systems, any AI systems, when you develop those systems. The users who see the context in which they will place the system need to go through a human rights impact assessment and try to mitigate these harms. Otherwise, we will run into such kind of scandals all the time. Also, a public registry for these systems would be very, very, very useful.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosalia. Marily. Is it on?
Let's see, is it working?
Yes.
Yeah, good, okay. So I think regulations are supposed to mitigate risks, yes. All kinds of risks cannot be foreseen or regulated, but that's okay, I think. So I don't think it's a problem of AI Act per se, that we're going to have risks still, even with the regulations in places.
So should there be more information on that, or just in society, more discussion?
Both, I think, but definitely discussion also within society, yes. So it's the question about how we would, or what is the problem exactly?
The question, to my understanding, it's a problem that we just take, for example, the things that AI, the information AI provides us with, for granted. And so we get lazy in our thinking. For example, this risk assessment, I don't know, I maybe here our experts know better, but I suspect that mostly as the Dutch childcare benefit scandal comes from using the AI, and we're not discussing the decision of the authorities. This is actually strange because there had to be a decision. This was only a risk assessment. That means that they took the risk assessment and made it a decision. So, and I think we see it very often. We hear it also that it's a problem also for democracy, or now speaking of false information or something, even suggestions that are taken for granted, that are so. And mostly, if we speak about the regulation, also the regulation still follows a risk-based approach. So we still would only know if their AI is used if there's a high risk AI, if it would qualify as high risk. But usually we don't know, we often don't know. So there are algorithms that are, for example, to some extent working on us to decide things. We know it all from advertisements or so. Usually we don't see advertisements anymore randomly. We see them because there are algorithms that have learned that we like cats, or that we have babies, or what else, you know. So I think, yeah, maybe this is like the question, you know, this gray zone where it's not regulated. We rely on them. Have you any thoughts about it?
Yeah, speaking on this, I have actually a lot of thoughts, but first of all, AI technology, there's a lot of things you can apply AI to. There can be, I don't know, optical character recognition, for example, on that when it draws out from a picture a text and translates into a text, that's also AI. That doesn't really impact human rights, any freedoms or rights or anything important, right, in that sense. When we talk about risk assessments that affect, for example, human profiling in this case, or as you mentioned, the ads are being shown to us, it's also in a sense this human profiling. So from data protection, we know that there are such thing as filter bubbles, and this is one of the risks, of course, right? And in terms of regulating these risks in decision making, I don't think we can much regulate more than to fact that we always need to oversee these decisions, of course, right? But I think it's more a question of the data quality and where do we actually get the data from. So being transparent about the data source, because ultimately AI is trained on data, right? And as the data, how much biased the data is, that's how much the AI will be biased. So it learns from that set of data. So I think the discussion more should be all about where do we get the data from? Is it correct? Is it actually something that we can use for this AI to be trained to make these decisions? And then a human person to oversee these decisions and to weigh out whether it's correct or not. But yes, definitely humans should always be involved in the process to oversee it, but transparency is the key, I think, for data sources.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to comment on that briefly?
Yes, but I think in this regard, the AI Act is meant to make things better because those regulations derive from the act that there needs to be human oversight, that people need to be told that they are interacting with AI, not with another real person. So I think in that regard, the act is going to have a positive effect.
Lauren, you don't seem convinced.
This is such an exhausting debate and it leads nowhere. Humans want answers, and most humans, especially in the public sector, don't want, and I've worked there, so I'm shitting on myself here. Don't want answers, they want directions on how to act. Like, it's about conformity. what as a public servant, if I am working in that Dutch agency, what is my incentive for doing well? What is my incentive to double checking and questioning every single decision that the AI made? The answer is zero. If we look at the banking sector, and the banking sector is not a perfect industry at all. However, every single bank employs an army of credit analysts to make sure, they have calculation models, they have different finance models and so on, but they still have an army of credit analysts and so on that look at, okay, so this model tells me this, does that check out? Does that make sense? And they have a very strong, in this case, it is financial, a very strong incentive to question whether computer says no is the correct answer or not. Yeah. And in the public sector, that incentive does not exist. So whether the AI Act talks about that or doesn't is completely irrelevant. Because even if it does say that, the public servant on the ground will not implement whatever that act says. So the question is, how can we incentivize the correct behavior of public servants? The founder of my consultancy firm was the first chief information officer of Estonia. And one of the very few ideas that were shot down by the government was to make sure that there is financial incentive, sort of participation in the success of government enterprises for the people that work there. Unheard of. Can you think of a single government agency around the world where the employees are rewarded if things go well? Maybe you get a medal from the president. Good on you. You get a watch. Good. That's it. So if that is the reward scheme that we have for the public sector, it doesn't matter.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I just I think maybe it's a comment on what Florian said here.
Yes. I just wanted to call attention to a fundamental.
You have to come a bit nearer.
Yeah. So
thank you. Sorry.
Sorry. I just wanted to call attention to a fundamental problem in the AI Act. So there is transparency requirement there, but only for low risk AI. So bots needs to tell me that they are bots and not human beings, but no one needs to tell me that a high risk AI is actually working on me in a sense. So that transparency requirement is missing, and I think this is something we need to stand up against for.
Yeah, this is actually an issue, yes, but even Jan Tallinn also said that we will soon not know what is, however, produced by AI and what not. Sarah, maybe you can comment on that as you, research on the impact of this technology on our society, how that is with the decision making and the AI.
Yeah, they're all really interesting points. I kind of think that you can't regulate your way out of something so complex. You need to give some kind of freedom and accountability to the individuals and to humans as such that are kind of like interacting with this technology. I think that we live under a huge under two misapprehensions. The first one is that we somehow live in a unique time in history. And the second one is that AI somehow has like godly powers. It's statistics on steroids. That's what it is. And I think that, for example, the first thing that I disagree with is the way that even the categories of the AI Act are actually structured. So, for example, chatbots are in like the low risk area. You can have an extremely manipulative chatbot that can be much more dangerous than collecting biometric data in a hospital setting. But because you don't explain the principles to people, you don't explain to them what the anatomy of an algorithm looks like, all that you see is basically clickbait media articles about, AI is going to take over the world. Like, it's really not. Like, it's maths. And I think the number one thing that we need to do is education. A case in point, when the Ukraine crisis, when the Ukraine war started, we put together like a technological resistance of basically like a bunch of hackers who were trying to repel hacking attacks. And like the second day of the invasion, the Czech Post was hacked. That's not difficult to do. That's a whole thing for itself, but cybersecurity in the state sector is a whole other kind of thing that's, I think, much more important to sort out than AI. But so the Czech Post was hacked. There was a phishing SMS that was sent to the Czech population, and a ridiculously high number of people clicked on that phishing scam. We were then talking to the NGOs that were sending trains to the Ukrainian borders. And one of the things that they were doing is, for example, posting the times of the train departures on Facebook. That's information that if you put out during World War II, you'd be shot, because like that's extremely sensitive information. And when we were talking to the Ukrainian refugees who came over to the Czech Republic, they had geolocation switched on. They were WhatsApping their family members back in Kiev. Again, like they can track you thanks to that. Like one of the reasons that, for example, the first wave of Russians was tracked because they were on Tinder.
Yeah.
And they were on Tinder, they didn't switch off their geolocation, so you could track down an entire military unit. And when you see the basic misunderstanding of these technologies amongst the average person, how do you want to regulate it? The likelihood is that the bureaucrat making this decision and the bureaucrats that are going to be enforcing this AI Act don't actually know what AI is. And we have a massive educational problem there. Our neighbors, the Finns, have got a super solution, I think, which is a free course, Elements of AI, that people, like everyone from my grandmother to like a 12-year-old can do. And I think that's exactly the #1 step of like not alienating the masses and not thinking, oh, you know, they're the kind of like dumb recipients of any regulation that we kind of send on them. No, they need to be the #1 people who are educated. And then the other side, from the side of the companies or the government, is the UX. Why has this algorithm made this decision? Why are you seeing an ad for horses or babies or dogs or whatever? Because you clicked on this and this and this. And I think it's a two-way feedback system that needs to happen. And one last thing, sorry, I love history. So just to kind of address the thing I was saying at the beginning, that we think that we live in a special time in history. There's two examples. The first one is the first example of fake news that goes all the way back to like the first Emperor Augustus in the Roman Empire. He founded the post office so that he can basically spread bullshit about Cleopatra, because he had a big problem with Mark Antony, who was part of the triumvirate, going to Egypt, having a great time raiding the Bank of Ephesus from the Temple of Artemis, and basically just like splurging and like having like chilling back like in Alexandria. So he didn't like that. So he's like, okay, how can I effectively spread information through the empire? So he founded the post office. But we don't really consider the post office to be too controversial these days. It's because we've become naturalized to it. Exactly the same when we talk about deep fakes and we kind of like up in arms and like wake up in a cold sweat. During the English Civil War, the Roundheads versus the Cavaliers, the Roundheads used really high quality paper with the king's insignia to basically print fake leaflets of proclamations of the king and then spread it amongst people. And they'd be like, oh my God, I can't believe the king said that. Again, like we've been like humans, whatever technology we get in our hands, we abuse it. That's gonna happen whether the regulation is there or not. So I think education is the only way how we can become more resilient as a society in that regard, and not regulating our way out of it.
Just a very quick note, that AI basic course was actually translated or sort of converted into Estonian by the University of Tartu, and it's been very popular in Estonia as well. That being said, there is a lot more to be done in the area of education. So yeah, just like a...
Yeah, exactly. I think, yeah, this is the way, and maybe the difference is still the magnitude and the amplitude of the sharing of false information, of all this today. You know, beforehand you said a letter, nowadays you spread it into the whole world within some seconds. So this is definitely one issue. And actually thinking of that, I thought maybe, yeah, we could comment on an article I read on Verfassungsblog 2 days ago, actually on large generative AI models, LGAIM. And this article actually was also partly produced by ChatGPT. So, and then ChatGPT wrote there that the models are designed to generate new content that is similar to the training data, which may include offensive or inappropriate content. Furthermore, large generative models can generate synthetic content that is difficult to distinguish from real content, making it challenging to differentiate between real and fake information. And the sheer volume of content generated by these models can make it difficult to manually review and moderate all of the generated content. So this was then also a text produced by these models. And if I'm to simply speaking, and coming back to the AI Act, then the member states seeing this problem approaching have at the moment thought of a solution to put it in easy words, that most of this GAIM would be then now be high risk AI, qualified as high risk AI. Is this the solution? Is this an example of overregulation, or what are we doing here? Is this exactly what we have been speaking in the beginning about, that we are trying to regulate things that actually every week something new is popping up? What Jan Tallinn was actually also addressing, that we're moving at a quicker pace in every minute, and regulations can't cope mostly with it anymore. And we don't know ourselves anymore what is AI, what not, maybe. Is there in this case any sense at all to regulate something?
I'm not a lawyer, so I would love your input on this as well. But I think a big question with generative algorithms in general that's popping up is the idea of intellectual property. So, for example, if you're a scientist like me and you want to patent something, that takes years, and you need to have a lot of cash in order to be able to do it. Again, blockchain is, for example, a technology where you can do it pretty much immediately, but it's often not recognized as equally as valid as the patent. What's really interesting, though, I was discussing with a fellow scientist the use of ChatGPT to actually help you generate scientific articles. Why not? Like if there's that boring part of like a literature review and you need to like research everything online and then you need to compile it, if you have AI that helps you and you can actually spend longer doing science and longer diving deep into the problematics, you still have the original human creativity, but you're not spending your time doing admin. Like 90% of the work of a scientist is filling in grant applications or doing like admin stuff. If you have a generative algorithm that can, for example, help you with that, that'd be great, because you can spend more time answering the questions that matter. The amount of backlash that I get with anyone discussing is like, oh no, the scientist needs to put in the work. No, you need to be up until 3 a.m. and like drink 2 bottles of wine and be really depressed and like have a bad time doing it, because that's what science is. It's suffering. And I think we haven't really moved past the kind of industrial mindset of we have to work, 5 days a week, 9 to 5. And unless it's like, handmade, and unless it's like drenched in the blood, sweat and tears, it's almost not worth it. And it's a really interesting anthropological kind of like relation that we have to the output, and like making it easier for ourselves is somehow seen as bad. And I think that with generative algorithms, that's kind of like what's popping up a lot, is that you're somehow like making it easier to create art, to like let creativity flow. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because
what happens to the poor artists?
I think it's like, how many of you use Canva, for example? Canva or like Wix or anything. It's like saying what's going to happen to the poor web developers. I still use a web developer because I don't have the time to go into Wix or like drag and drop all the various stuff. So like I don't think that it's going to eliminate the jobs. I think it's going to change their nature a little bit. But it's like if we're trying to have regulation to stop Canva from happening, I think it's kind of like, well, I think it's fine.
Thank you. Yeah,
I wanted to comment on this. I really also think that the issue lies in intellectual property and copyrights. But for example, for Canva, there are people who are aware of the fact that they create this template. And then when you buy the subscription, you actually buy this license, right, to use it. But with generative AI, for example, now in California, there's a court case where I don't remember the parties. I will not say specifically, but there's a court case where there's an AI which generates pictures, but the data source, and it also, again, comes to a data source, it was taken from a website seemingly like as Unsplash, or these websites where these copyrighted pictures that you can buy licenses for, right? So the training data was actually from a page where there are pictures who are copyrighted, and from that it generated a picture for you with the generative AI, right? And then this company sued this other company who had made this AI product. And then the question there is whether this work that has derived from the source, whether it's derivatory or it's transformative. So I think it will really shape our way of thinking of like, actually, is this work really a copyright breach or not, and how much it's transformative or not. So I think there's a lot of discussion between that. And again, it's the data source, whether we can actually use this data source for this kind of product. So for example, they use this data source where there are pictures who are copyrighted already. So can we actually do that? Maybe there should be a solution where we should obtain, for example, this consent before using a data source. So maybe that's a solution for that, to avoid these copyright infringements. But also there's a risk, for example, that AI can there's no guarantee that AI will not give you one-on-one text from the source that you have, right? So you can never be sure, but you can use it as a source to gain inspiration from, and it's a really great source. Why not? Why not? Automation is the future, and why not use it? But you have to be really careful for that. If it's content, if it's pictures, if it's art, okay, you can use it as inspiration. But if it's factual checking, then not. And I saw an example with ChatGPT where it was given to give an answer which is heavier, 1 kilogram of water or 1 kilogram of feathers,
The
right? And
kids just gave that to
yeah,
me.
and it said water because the density is higher for it. But you know, it's not factually correct. So you really have to weigh out and logically think about how you actually use these products. And for inspiration, I'm all for it, but one-on-one copying, probably not, until we know how we think about it. So yeah.
Thank you. Sonia, any thoughts on that? No, you're listening to us. Good. Then still, as we're here, think about regulations. And we're speaking about human rights and fundamental rights. So actually, we have an ongoing debate, and I think also a very important one, about the question if there should be any new rights, new fundamental rights we should think of, write down, implement. For example, right to meaningful human contact, right to not be profiled, obligation to be online or not, fundamental obligation of a good citizen. Should we have that? Right to not be nudged, obligation to just accept to be nudged. Any thoughts on that? Are we lacking some rights? Or what about, this transparency that we actually want soon and don't actually, none of us knows where all these algorithms are working on us for a day-to-day basis as soon as we just get our phone and look at it. Thank you. Yeah, Florian.
Perhaps I can,
yes,
perhaps I can take this first. We had a lovely conversation during lunch break when I was in Ethiopia at the United Nations Internet Governance Forum. There was a whole day, or even 2 days, I think it was, on Afrofeminism in AI. And knowing nothing about the topic, I thought, I should join in for some of the sessions. And there was a panel of 4 or 5 Black ladies on the panel. And they were all complaining that facial recognition cameras in cities are way better at recognizing white men than Black women. And they were upset about that. And I raised the question as well to them afterwards. How would you feel if I told you that white men would pay a good amount of money to not be recognized by facial recognition systems around the world, to go unnoticed, to just like go about their daily business without anyone bothering them or recording their face or analyzing them that way. And they sort of said, yeah, like we didn't think about it that way, but we just want equality. And so whatever new rights we are talking about, we sort of need to see where different strata in society currently place on that spectrum of like how close are they to attaining that right, and is that a desirable outcome? I personally am very happy with the situation of my rights. There is an argument to be made about whether services should always be offered in an offline way as well as an online way. As an e-government consultant, of course, I would love to see everyone online and do everything online, and it's all done in 10 seconds. It's not a problem. But the reality is we have people with disabilities. We have people with low IT skills, although biology is over time taking care of that. And so, but the question is still, does it make sense to create any IT solution, whether it's AI based or not, that is 100% accessible for the entire population? And that is, economically speaking, not viable. I cannot in good conscience, develop a program that considers every single person's demand in a system. And so usually what you see, Estonian tax declaration, online takes 3 minutes on average. 98.7% of people do it voluntarily. Yeah, and awesome. Still only 98.7%. What do the other 1.3% do? Well, they have some reasons why they can't use the system. So this desire of inclusivity, it's very understandable, but in practical terms, it's very unlikely to happen. So that's one discussion sort of where I would say the right to have something offline for various given reasons might be a valid one.
Okay, thank you. Rosalia, I saw you raising your hand. It disappeared, but you have the floor.
Yes. So I have two comments. The first would be that the right not to be profiled, I think we actually do have that right if we interpret the right to privacy appropriately, which doesn't mean that it would not make sense, politically speaking, to recognize it as a separate right. So I would actually be happy with this idea if there were a political movement again behind it. The second one is about the facial recognition cameras. So I think when colored people are saying that this is not really good, that the facial recognition system do not really work on them the same way they work on white men, what they complain about is not really that, oh, I want to be recognized by the police when they have street cameras, and it would be so nice if they could be able to match my ID with my camera picture. But what they are complaining about is the misidentifying. So when they are misidentified and then it causes problems in life, they are getting stopped by the police, they are having problems on the airport and so on and so forth. So it's not just like, yeah, we would want to have this quality and we deserve the same quality as white people. Yes, they deserve the same quality, but actually the consequences of the misidentifying are the problems for them.
And what new rights would you like to see, Rosalia, maybe? Do you have any suggestions? What are we lacking in our constitutions at the moment? Digital.
I think like before thinking about new rights, I would be happy if we could enforce the rights we actually have recognized.
Also a very valid point. Thank you. Merili, would you like to comment on that?
I think it's a double-ended sword in the sense that we're talking about, do we want additional legislation? No, we do not. Do we want new fundamental rights? Yes, we do. Shouldn't the fundamental rights be the very last thing we are changing? Also, I think a lot of the things we mentioned can be fit under the right for privacy, which I am very thankful we're nowadays talking about. Everyone's fundamental right to privacy. Also, the question you raised, Paloma, about should there be a right to human interaction? That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it like that. If not a right, then at least a value that should be really taken into account, I think.
Thank you so much. Sorry. Oh, sorry, no. Florian, I was getting about our only male here.
I have to speak for 50% of the population here. It's unbelievable. I have to quickly respond to Rosalia's point. That's what I was trying to point out. You can't have negation of negative kind of profiling without also having negation of the positive impact. So like you either get both or you get nothing, and that's precisely the crux that we're standing in front of. Regarding the human interaction point, so in my previous life, when I worked for the public sector, I explained digitalization in Estonia to all kinds of different stakeholders from around the world, and one of the groups that I dealt with was some cardinals from Germany, I think some Catholic church situation. And they said, 99.9% of services online, all nice and well, but don't you lose the human touch? Don't you miss that human connection? And I sort of leaned over and I asked, also to you guys in the room, do you miss that human interaction with the government official at the tax office? Don't you miss sitting down with your notary in person when you could do everything in 30 seconds online? So like, I think the kinds of human interactions that we're talking about, depending on whether it's public, private sector, or just, private between individuals, I think there's a very big difference that would have to be legislated. And I think that's where things get very sketchy very fast, when government thinks what kind of human contact is worthy of protecting and which one is not. And, we can go crazy. Again, we'll see you tonight at the pub.
The Human Contact Act.
Yes. So that's, if there was ever a slippery slope, this is the one, in my opinion.
Isn't it a problem if you have a problem like what I don't know, eBay, Amazon, or where once you try or we have a flight gone wrong, and then you try to find a human contact and you have no phone number anywhere, and you write your letters into nowhere. Maybe this idea of having human contact, so if I needed to contact someone.
Have you had exclusively positive interactions with customer support?
It's better than not having any feedback and the lawyer.
Usually I can absolutely.
Elvira, have you any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of customer support, I can say I've had definitely bad experience where there's none. So I would say human still is needed for at least specific problem solving. But if we're talking about extra fundamental rights, I mean, the only right that I think, we cannot avoid profiling in any case. I think AI it's happening already. It will probably be happening, and we cannot avoid that, right? The only thing that we can do is give some sort of control over the data that is being processed here. So I think this human intervention, at least in a way of what kind of data are being processed about you, this is the only solution, I think. And that's the only right that could be. Maybe consent, maybe a way to kind of control what kind of data is being profiled about you. That's the only thing that I could
Quite
say.
a transparency issue, maybe
transparency
also,
issue.
just to know, but
knowing doesn't really solve the issue of being able to actually influence it.
Absolutely.
So one is transparency, but the other would be the ability to influence it. Yeah,
that's a very, very good point. Also, Sarah, an expert on human society.
No,
What are we lacking?
Human society. Wow, I'll put that in my CV. I think there's a couple of things that I'm thinking about. The first one is that there's a huge imbalance of power and accountability between the structures that say what fundamental human rights should be, which is predominantly Euro-American context, and then the grassroots, like what humans actually want and need. If you don't pay your taxes, and oh my God, if the taxes took 3 minutes online in the Czech Republic, I would actually even go vote, or start being engaged in politics. Like, this is incredible what you're telling me. It's like magic as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, but if you don't pay your taxes, for example, you get thrown in prison. If someone anonymous, one of the kind of like people in the Ministry of, like, I don't know, finance, for example, badly interprets your data, where's the accountability there? And I think there's a huge disbalance of power. So I think that in order for that to become, for example, more managed, I should have the right to change my citizenship. If I'm not, it's like a subscription. Like, if I'm not happy, like where I'm living right now, why shouldn't I have the right to change my citizenship and go somewhere else? It's a philosophical question, which I think would have huge repercussions in kind of international diplomacy, but that's just throwing that question out there. The second one is that a lot of the time we really discuss bullshit, and pardon my French, but like when I went to Ethiopia as well in December, for example, like the way that they approach the startup world, they're not doing like the 50th startup on like recommendation algorithms. They're doing startups like using artificial intelligence for early detection of malaria. They didn't have time for nonsense and basically like doing this whole kind of like investor startup, like slightly Ponzi scheme thing that's sometimes going on in Silicon Valley. They actually have to solve real world problems. And then sometimes when I hear the discussions around, what are human rights? Like, do human rights even exist? Like, how should we coin them? And then, seeing the World Economic forum kind of talk about how terrible climate change is whilst flying in on all their private jets into Davos, I'm thinking maybe for us, it's more like a system of social capital that we have the kind of luxury to talk about these things, but they don't actually solve any real world problems. So I think that what would be a great human right for me is for grassroots, for the average person in the street to actually have a say in where the future is going and to actually have the right to be forgotten, have the right to immediately have access to all their data, have the right to make sure that if the state does keep their data, it's actually in a secure place, which, for example, during COVID, we found that medical data that's being stored by like the Ministry of Healthcare is like on a random server somewhere, just like behind one hyperlink, like barely behind a password. And that's not okay. So without like sounding communist about this, more power to the people in regards to actually having some kind of self-determination and power to kind of decide in their day-to-day lives. And I think that comes from kind of accountability of the state as well, which the states are often not happy to actually put on themselves.
Thank you. Elvira, you wanted to?
No, I just wanted to quickly say, yeah, because the decisions are ultimately made for ourselves. So it would be, it would just make sense that we would have the ability to influence it.
Quick note from my side. Actually, there is a digital citizenship for Estonia. So if you're interested, feel free to join.
I've already looked at it. Yeah. I'm saving money as we speak. Yeah.
And of course, what was also mentioned by Katrin at the very start, the data tracker that we have in Estonia, so you can sort of see when government officials look at your data.
I know. You guys are really good.
God, the government should give me commission for that stuff. But regarding the impact of legislation, to go back to the AI Act, what we've seen with the GDPR is to what extent EU regulations and legislation just impact the rest of the world as well. Countries like Brazil that are effectively copy pasting, UK as well, but we don't want to talk about the UK. But like countries like Brazil effectively copy pasting the GDPR because one of the big markets is all of the EU countries. So go figure, you know. And as a result, we also have to think about the implications of any AI act in whatever shape or form it will come into force. Does it take into consideration the realities on the ground in other countries as well? This is not what our parliament was elected to do. The Brazilians did not vote for it, but still we will have to take their understanding in some ways into consideration.
This would be one approach, but wasn't it with the GDPR similar, where it was said no one will accept that? So the EU wanted to have that lead and they practically got it. So the question, yeah, where we come from. Actually, we have a question here. Just introduce it to us. Panel appears to be pro-regulation. Okay, considering the risks of limiting independency of AI, hence hindering overall progress of the technology, where does the panelists think a line should be crossed on the limitations of the regulations? So I think maybe someone want to comment on that?
Maybe just quickly, this is not actually AI regulation, but it's the NIS2 cybersecurity regulation that's coming in. And in the Czech Republic alone, it's going to hit up to 6,000 SMEs and companies. But within those companies are not just, you know, banks and institutions that are traditionally used to dealing with cybersecurity. It's places like slaughterhouses and like water sewage disposal plants. And suddenly you're going to have like a thick PDF that's going to come there and saying, how's your cybersecurity situation looking like? And they run on Windows 98. And that's fine to actually have that kind of regulation come in. But the other one is actually implementing it. And so that it's actually useful. And what I'm really worried about is that you're going to go to someone and say, this is a high risk system. You need to make sure that it goes through like 3 rounds of iteration, like between like your local official and like the desired effect. And it's going to take up so much time, so much effort. And the educational aspect of the people actually knowing why they're doing it in the first place might be lacking in that regard. So again, it all goes back to education, communication, and as little regulation as possible.
At first, they have to evaluate themselves. If it's high risk, it's on them to do that.
Yeah, I already also
Yeah.
touched upon this about this implementation in the beginning, but I think the limits are the expectations. Yes, you receive this notice that you need to be compliant as you're a high risk system or an AI developer or an AI distributor. But at the same time, what is the support from the government side, from the institution side, how to help these SMEs, right? So maybe those are sandboxes. Maybe for those who cannot maybe afford to be compliant or maybe not understand, there's an education, there's a sandbox to help them to understand why they need to comply, to help them comply. Maybe that can be the solution. But basically managing the expectations from, yes, all of the companies that might be affected.
I think one of the lines that I would draw is please don't try to a priori classify the threat or risk level of different kinds of AI models, because and you alluded to this very, very directly. You don't know what a model is capable of until it has already happened. You know, by definition, laws are reactive. You know, it's not like you know, you sit down one beautiful Saturday afternoon and you say, oh, I know there's going to be a massive space laser in 2134 and it's going to do this kind of damage, and so I'm going to regulate against this kind of technology right now. Not going to happen. You can sort of guesstimate in what direction we're going, as we are, which is exactly what we're doing with AI, but we're inevitably, one of those sentences in that regulation is not going to stick. We're going to overclassify something, we're going to underclassify something. So I would just I would want to keep the this framework as broad as possible, if it exists, that it does not, you know, create too stringent a framework.
Okay, thank you for all these thoughts. Actually, I was thinking back to the talk I had with Jan Tallinn today. And very interesting thoughts on existential risks that could come with AI. And we addressed it then, and I thought it's good also to ask you, because there seems to be this discussion on the existential risks, and it seems somehow far away from us. Then we are discussing here ChatGPT and the things we really have hold of, and I don't know, here childcare benefit scandals. That seems like, okay, this is the real world. This is what we can get hold of when we maybe, and maybe this existential risks, even this topic seems a bit far away from us, or sci-fi. How would you address it? Do you think that there's enough discussion about that? Do you think that we're lacking this discussion and we're just following this, how to say, AI development and success as we see it in our policy papers, nationwide, on international level? Maybe also a bit, how did you feel about this discussion today, which I myself personally found very interesting and very impacting? Areli, would you like to start?
Yes, I also think it was really interesting what Jan said, and especially the thing that AI is not the alien, you know. I am a lawyer, but I do trust IT engineers, developers, and isn't what Jan also said that in a lot of the cases, AI could be quite straightforward. We know how it works, what it's going to present. So I don't think we're close to distinction because of AI. I think the key is to have enough IT knowledge in national institutions to have them work together with lawyers. And I think that's the right way to go about it.
Osolia, would you like to comment, just to leave you out there?
Personally speaking, I'm not really worried about an AI being my ruler and basically human beings getting extinct because of that. But I think what we should focus on are the existential risks that are not like risk of dying, but risk of losing employment, risk of losing benefits, and so on and so forth for vulnerable groups, which is actually happening. And I think we should pay a better attention to.
Ira.
Yeah, as I see AI, there are many technologies, right? And you also referred to that, that there are, and Jan also referred to that, there are many technologies where it can be applied. There's this general generative AI, and there's this, for example, text-to-speech, speech-to-text, OCR technology, which is very limited, very specifically trained for one specific purpose. But how I see AI in general, how you look at artificial intelligence is that you try to replicate humans' brain, right? And in neuroscience, and that's not my field, so correct me if I'm wrong, but in that field, we also yet don't know to full extent, we don't know yet humans' brain. We don't know how emotions work. We don't know what is consciousness. There's no unified definition for it. Same like with AI, right? So when we talk about existential crisis, people usually think about this doomsday where robots will take over the world, they become conscious and they will rule over us, right? I think we are far away from the fact that they could become conscious, since we don't know yet humans' brain and how it works. So we cannot really replicate it on a computer. We cannot program it to feel emotions. We cannot program it to have values. We don't know what it is even, so it cannot feel pain or temperatures. Jan also reflected on that, I think. And so in that sense, but the danger with it is that this undeveloped AI that is not on the same level as human is allowed to make decisions for us. So that's, I think, the most danger that there is, right? Until we're at that point, which will be probably far away, then at that point, we need to worry about it. But in general, I don't think we're yet on that path, but we need to do the education part. We need to discuss about it, what dangers it can bring, educate the society. What is even AI? What are the functions that we use on a daily basis where it reflects actually? So yeah, but in general, in terms of doomsday, I think that's the most major, biggest risk that there is for not yet developed AI on a human level, that I don't know if it can be achievable, for it to let it rule over decisions that impact us. So yeah.
Yeah, Flori.
I've got 1 + 2 thoughts. The first one is not related to AI, but still potentially an existential threat, is mass data storage by governments. My native Germany, every 2 or 3 years, Parliament goes back to the EU and says, can we pretty please just store data about people? Just in case they do something bad in a couple of years. And the EU comes back to them and says, no. And they come back and say, this time maybe? It's like some people in the highest palaces of power do not conceptually understand what it means to have that much data and have it almost as openly accessible as the Czech Post database. So like there's a fundamental disconnect between, and I think this is a very human condition, between our actual abilities and what we think we can do. And the same is true on that sort of organizational level. About the sort of 2 AI related existential threats. I mean, the most typical that we get from science fiction is there's a Terminator, it kills us all and we're done, because the AI thinks that whatever, humans are best off if we're dead, whatever. I think the risk of that is if it does exist, it's extremely far away, and probably there are ways to pull that plug, even though Jan very correctly asked, have you tried pulling it out before? It's a very good question. And this is probably the last point, this is, as far as I understood, where I disagree with Sarah, surprisingly. I know. Is the threat of AI to employment. Your understanding was that it's sort of it will change our jobs, but it will not eliminate most, as far as I understood. Or
Oh no, I think it will eliminate a huge amount of jobs. Yeah,
and that's precisely my worry. I think there's a very strong distinction to be made between white and blue collar jobs, and we're all sitting here. This gentleman there in his white collar, actually. So you know, we're a very privileged bunch of people talking about very pie in the sky ideas right now. If I think about self-driving cars, which are technically mostly, again, not 100% perfect, but in most traffic conditions, they can handle most situations. Yeah. In the US, the transport industry employs between 15 and 20% of the population. You will be gone if you work there, because if insurances catch wind that insuring an AI-driven truck is cheaper than insuring your ass, because you might fall asleep behind the wheel, you might text, you might put on Netflix, you cost you cost social benefit money and so on. So all of these taxes they have to pay for you. And if they get wind that there is an AI that can handle your job 90% as fast, but with an almost 0% accident rate, you're gone over time. Not all at once, but over time you will be gone. And so the question is, how will we retrain such a big part of the population? And does capitalism sustain a model where everyone is creative?
Our legal tech is also here to stay. Half of the rooms
Absolutely.
will also soon be gone, including me.
As a translator, sort of part-time, I am feeling terribly offended at ChatGPT and everything connected to that. And Google Translate, I think there is a very real risk of technology shaking at the market conditions that exist today. Will it cause an existential threat? No idea.
Thank you. Sarah.
Yeah, but by the way, we don't actually disagree. It's all good. It's all good. I do
Never.
think that there will be a huge amount of jobs that will be replaced, but I'm not necessarily scared of it, because again, like looking into history, like 120 years ago, most people in the USA were employed in agriculture. That's no longer the case. It's, I think, like around 2%, down from about 91% within a relatively short space of time, maybe 4 or 5 generations. But it is definitely true that it's not really AI's fault. It's like how we adapt to that as society. And I don't have the answer, but my research group is, for example, very much focused on the interplay of humans and technology, because the last time we had an industrial revolution, yeah, you had a steam engine. Okay, fine. The Romans actually kind of pioneered the steam engine, but they thought it wasn't interesting, so they kind of abandoned it as a toy. It'd be interesting to see steam-powered Roman Empire. But anyway, that's a steampunk dream of mine. But what happened in 1842? Marx and Engels went to do an anthropological study of the workers in Liverpool, and lo and behold, you suddenly had, do you know what would be better if we organized society like this? And then, 100 million people dead later, we figured out that communism wasn't a good idea. But you can see that yes, you had the kind of origin of the steam engine, and then this kind of social reactions to it were huge. And I think that that's actually the biggest problem of AI is just the goddamn name. Artificial intelligence is a terrible name. Like if, I don't know, the scientists that met in 1956 in Dartmouth said, let's not call it artificial intelligence, let's call it like data classifiers. Do you think there would be such hype? Like, oh, imagine if the media articles were like, oh, I wonder if the data classifier is going to be accurate today. Like no one would read it. But AI, it's sexy. There's blood, like there's fear around it. And last time that happened was, again, if we look into history, the current wars between Edison and Tesla. Back then, the alternating current was like something that you absolutely stayed away from, because Edison was actually, he was a massive dick. That's like number one. But number two, he used to do these things like when the electric chair was first invented, he had this guy steal a generator from Westinghouse's factory to attach it to the first electric chair to show how terrifying the alternating current is. We're not discussing alternating current now. We think, yeah, pretty cool, Tesla, cool guy. And I do believe that we will reach that point with artificial intelligence as well, where we realize that it's basically just churning numbers and automating something that would otherwise take hundreds of years to compute, like cracking the Enigma during the Second World War. But in order to break that psychological barrier, we need to educate people, educate, tell them what AI means, tell them what it doesn't mean, and stay away from like the sexiness of the Terminator movies, and actually kind of maybe sell less films and maybe sell less articles, but actually tell people what is actually going on underneath the hood. So I think education, like accountability, will kind of like shoo those doomsday scenarios away in quite a big respect. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I have a look at the clock. So our time's almost up. I have to say, I found it really interesting, and I'm looking forward for this after work beer where we can go on discussing the different views we have heard here. And now I would like to conclude with this classical wrapping up question. As you all came here today, only Orsolya couldn't, but she was all ready to come. So I think you have had some thoughts about our panel, AI or machine learning and regulations. And so for us also to take something home, what would be your most important takeaway for the audience from our today's discussion? Maybe we start with Madeline.
Personally, in no way am I saying that AI Act is here to solve all of the problems. It's not. I definitely agree that we need to first and foremost educate our people, our officials, everyone. But I just feel like we're already at the point where we need some piece of legislation for more legal clarity on this topic. So because of that, I do welcome the idea of coming forward with the AI Act. But yes, of course, first and foremost, education.
Thank you. Osalia.
So my takeaway would be that the AI Act as it is very, very problematic in many levels and many respects, but without a regulation, ethical behavior is way too costly. So I do believe that the regulation is very much needed.
Thank you. Elvira.
Well, my takeaway is that AI, of course, is a powerful tool. I think AI should be used for automating simple processes to help you become more effective. And I usually stand by that always. But in terms of regulation, we still need to make sure that this technology does not land in the wrong hands and is not abused. So being transparent, regulating these maybe high risk AI, so we don't end up in a situation where China currently is with social scoring. That's very important. But AI by itself as a technology, I don't think it's dangerous. We're not yet close to a doomsday scenario where it becomes conscious and takes over the world. But we need to pay attention and educate people on how we use it, where we apply it, and who has the control over it. So yeah.
Thank you so much. So Florian.
My main takeaway is Beijing duck and crispy chicken. No, my main take. It's delicious. My
And the beer.
the pub. My main takeaway would be that if, God forbid, this thing passes, that please let there be an international, whether I'm guessing it would be EU based, let there be an international enforcement body so that the different national agencies don't start interpreting this act in different ways. If I look at the way that the GDPR is being differently interpreted across the EU right now, you know, and that is just data. You know, if we're now talking about how AI would be interpreted, I don't even want to think about it. So if there were to be that act, I would need that enforcement body to be international and of proper enforcement capacity. Thank you.
Definitely a good point. Sarah.
I just want to thank everyone that we had this discussion together. It was awesome. And I think that the number one takeaway is that interdisciplinarity is going to become incredibly important in having these discussions, and which I think we were a very interdisciplinary panel. So yes, I've secured myself a place in more conferences as an archaeologist. Awesome. The second point is that actually, yeah, like have the AI Act pass. I think that the state that it's in is absolutely atrocious, but like have it pass, but give the companies a very clear get out of jail card. So like if you don't like it, you're free to move to a place where the regulation doesn't exist, or you're free to set up a company on blockchain, like you're allowed to set up a DAO, for example, and take that risk on as the European Union, because I think what you'll find very quickly is that just because money talks from an economic perspective, those companies are not going to be doing their business in the EU, and it's already happening. We see a huge brain and financial drain from the Czech Republic as we stand, and I was in a discussion with the governmental officials, and there were people standing up from the private sector, and they were saying, you do realize half of us do our business in America or Switzerland. And so I think, yeah, have it pass, but have that kind of like evolutionary pressure valve that is going to be running in parallel, where you're prepared that the companies are going to leave you. And if they leave you, it's probably a sign of that you're not doing something well and that it's not working. And so I think that maybe that could be a nice little way of going about it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you also from my side to the panelists. I can only agree with Katrin Niemann-Metcalf and Sarah also that just AI is everywhere. It affects everything, and therefore I found it very interesting that we have all these different viewpoints in this panel. Thank you also to the organizers. Thank you from my side to the audience. All the best.